Comrade Salim, we are live now. You can start.
Hello, I welcome you all. Today, on the occasion of the 100 years of the communist movement in India, we are going to have a webinar. We have a good panel with us. Comrade Sitaram Yechury, General Secretary, CPIM, Comrade Prakash Karat, Member Politburo, and the former General Secretary of the CPIM, and another Politburo member, Comrade Nilotpal Basu, and myself, Mohammed Salim. So, before I introduce the speakers, the subject, as you know, our three speakers will speak on three distinct aspects. Comrade Sitaram will speak on overview on secularism and democracy. Comrade Prakash is going to speak on communists and class struggle. In between, Comrade Nilotpal Basu on communists and freedom struggle. So these three important topics will be taken care of three distinguished speakers today. And in between, if I think something to add, I may add, or at the end, I will speak on some points. So before asking Comrade Sitaram Yechury to start, I just make an announcement. 17th October 1920, the first Communist Party of India emerged in Tashkent. And we have a great history behind us and a legacy of freedom struggle, communists participating as the vanguard of the working class and as a militant contingent of the freedom struggle, national movement, at the same time bringing in the question of equity, equality, equal distribution, and a perception about what's going to be the post-independent India's picture. So, without going into at length, let me ask Comrade Sitaram Yechury and invite Comrade Sitaram Yechury to address this webinar on the issue of, as I told, overview, secularism and democracy, and the history of the communist movement in India. Thank you. Comrade Sitaram.
Thank you, Comrade Salim. I presume we'll have about 30 minutes each. Is that your, as a moderator?
You take your time, I think. No hard and fast rule, but 30 plus, no problem.
Okay, that is a big concession. Thank you very much. I think this is a very important occasion, and I think it's fairly historic occasion that tomorrow, the 17th of October 2020, marks the centenary of the foundation of the Communist Party of India. This century has been a golden chapter, in fact, in the history of people's struggles led by the communists in India. Immense sacrifices, innumerable martyrs, and the decisive role played by the communists in shaping the national agenda. And as an overview, all that we can say, and very, very cryptic, shortly, I'll put it in a nutshell, that in all important aspects of the founding of an inclusive, independent India, the communists played a decisive role in contributing to that agenda. The land struggles led by the communists brought to the fore the issue of the question of land reforms, the abolition of zamindari, the question of linguistic reorganization of states led by the communists in various parts brought together the political map of India post-independence, albeit nearly a decade after independence. But nevertheless, the entire issue of federalism, the relations between centers and states, and the linguistic states that emerged, that was an important element of the definition of a new India, the concept of a new India that was evolved. And on the issue of simple entry, for instance, like led by the communists in Kerala, or the issues of Dalit oppression or Adivasis and that of oppression of women, brought in the entire concept of social justice onto the national agenda. And therefore, whether it is a question of land and abolition of zamindari, which is interlinked with the question of economic self-reliance in India, the question of federalism, the question of social justice, and most importantly, the issue of secular democracy. That is, these four are the foundational pillars of the present Constitution of India. On each one of these, the struggles led by the communists have played a decisive role in contributing for the evolution of this entire concept of an inclusive India, given our diversity and given our entire multiple entities and identities that each one of us have, to unify this entire set of people into the unity of the people and the integrity of the country. The communist struggles led by the communists played a very important role in defining this and shaping this India. And that is what is under strain today. Each one of these four fundamental pillars, foundational pillars of our constitution, are being assaulted today, that all of us know, and we have been part of that discussion. And in fact, we are part of that struggle right now. So, in this entire struggle for the establishment of an inclusive India on the basis of these four fundamental pillars, the important element that arose was that the nature of the state that will be there in India, and that can only be a secular democratic republic, which is what the national movement agreed. But then the communists said that this secular democratic republic, this political freedom that we win, must be translated into the economic freedom of every individual. And that is possible only with socialism. And therefore, the struggle continues post-independence for a socialist society. And opposed to this was, of course, the view, which had a twin expression, that the character of India will be defined by the religious affiliation of its people. You had the Muslim League and under Muhammad Ali Jinnah arguing about the Islamic Republic, and you had the RSS advocating a fascistic Hindu Rashtra. That battle was settled at the time of independence, but the battle continued, and it continues today also. And what we are seeing today is precisely the assault to eliminate the secular democratic republic and put in its place the RSS political project of a fascistic Hindutva Rashtra. So this struggle in that sense continues, and an important element of this is that of secular democracy. Now, the party was formed in 1920, a year after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre was an expression of unity between the Hindus, Muslims, and the Sikhs, who were then joining the national movement in a big way, in a united manner. This was something, a complete anathema for the British, because the unity of Indian people, cutting across religions, cutting across castes, would have meant the death knell of colonial rule. So they further strengthened their policy of divide and rule. And immediately after Jallianwala Bagh, the next few years saw communal conflicts all over and communal riots erupting. So right around 21, 22, the Communist Party of India, formed in 1920, was very clear and articulate in saying that the antidote to this communal conflict is the unity of the exploited sections. And in fact, M.N. Roy writes very eloquently, saying that whether you're a Muslim peasant or a worker, or a Hindu peasant or a worker, the exploitation against you doesn't change. It is the exploited sections that will have to unite, and that is the antidote to these communal conflicts. So right from the inception, the Communist Party was intervening to uphold the principle of secularism. And in fact, that it was the first one to articulate that in Indian conditions, given our diversity, in Indian conditions, multiple diversities, not only religious diversity, linguistic diversities, traditions, or ethnic origins, given all these diversities, secularism and democracy cannot be seen in two separate compartments. It has to be secular democracy, because without the democratic rights and guarantees for the minorities of equality, you cannot strengthen secularism. And without secularism, you cannot really establish and consolidate democracy. So the concept of secular democracy that was brought in. And then every single session of the AICC after 1920, the Communist Party of India used to submit a manifesto to the AICC session on what should be the content of the national movement at that point of time. And in each one of them, in fact, we were the first ones to argue for complete independence in 1921 Ahmedabad AICC session. That is a separate issue now. But since then, till 1926, at the Guwahati AICC session, the manifesto that was presented by the Communist Party of India to that session was absolutely clear in stating that how we should tackle this communal conflicts. In fact, I quote from that manifesto. Quote, many must have been discouraged by the communal conflicts that have been devastating the country during the last years. It is certainly a discouraging phenomenon. But here again, a party of the people will find the solution. While the upper classes fight for rights and privileges, the masses of both the communities have one very vital thing in common, and that is exploitation. Unquote. And then further it says, quote, the same rule largely applies to the exploited middle classes, petty intellectuals, small traders, artisans, etc. United by the common tie of exploitation, 98% of the entire people have no reason to be involved in the communal conflicts. We need to help them to be conscious of their economic interests, give them courageous lead to fight against their common enemy, the forces of exploitation. The bottom will be knocked out of the insidious policy of provoking communal conflict. This cannot be done overnight, but there is no other remedy for the cancer of communalism that eats into the vitals of the nationalist movement. Unquote. There cannot be a greater clarity in how to tackle this issue. Yes, immediately, the communists supported all initiatives for peace committees, for restoring peace, for restoring normalcy in these conflict-ridden areas. But at the same time, the focus was on the unity of the exploiters, and the focus was on what the communist literature those days used to talk about, the unity of the toilers. So it was on this basis that we went on to define what is secularism. What is the communist understanding of secularism? Secularism is a clear-cut separation of religion from politics, religion from the state. It is the duty of the state and a guarantee that must be given through the constitution and the law and order and laws, particularly that the right of every individual to choose his own faith is a right that will be protected by the state. It will be a right that will be guaranteed to every individual, including the right not to believe in any faith and be an atheist. This right is inalienable. That you find in our constitution, those provisions that were brought in. But at the same time, nobody can interfere in the choice made by an individual on the particular faith that individual may choose. Now, this is the cornerstone. Nobody can say that my God is better than your God, or superiority, inferiority among religions, etc. So the cornerstone was that. But in practice, however, even during the national movement and particularly post-independence, in practice, however, secularism was defined not as the separation of religion from politics and state, but as the equality of all religions. The moment you define secularism as the equality of all religion, then inherent in that is the point that the religion to which the majority of the people subscribe will have a natural advantage. And that in itself will breed will breed these sort of communal conflicts and strengthen communalism. Now, this, what the communists have articulated and stood by, and our entire struggle post-independence has also been for the scientific basis of a proper understanding of what secularism means. And it is this the secularism that we have actually brought in our party congress, in our party program, where we have said very clearly in the current context in 2000, when we updated our party program, where we have said that in describing the character of these communal forces, what we said, the threat to the secular, I'm quoting, the threat to the secular foundations has become menacing with the rise of communal and fascistic-led RSS-led combined, and its assuming power at the center. Systematic efforts on to communalize the institutions of the state, the administration, the educational system, and the media. This is in para 5.7. In para 7.14, what do we say? Quote, the Bharatiya Janata Party is a reactionary party with a divisive and communal platform, the reactionary content of which is based on hatred against other religions, intolerance, and ultra-nationalist chauvinism. The BJP is no ordinary bourgeois party, as the fascistic Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh guides and dominates it. When the BJP is in power, the RSS gets access to the instrument of state power and state machinery. The Hindutva ideology promotes revivalism and rejects the composite culture of India with the objective of establishing a Hindu Rashtra, unquote. And then it defines our task in para 5.8. Quote, the danger of fascist trends gaining ground based on religious communalism must be firmly fought at all levels, unquote. So this entire attack on the secular democratic foundations of India was something that was actually analyzed, and with a clarity, with a crystal clear clarity. The Communist Party, and today the Communist Party of India, Marxist, carries forward this tradition of whereby what you see, I've just quoted from the party program, that warning of what you see, the penetration into all spheres of administration, the undermining of all constitutional authorities, beginning from the parliament, the judiciary, the election commission, the CBI, you name it. And this undermining of this is actually and accompanied by a very ferocious authoritarian onslaught on the democratic rights and civil liberties of the people. What we are seeing today, not only communal profiling and targeting of the Muslim minority community, but anybody who expresses dissent against this government, anybody who expresses solidarity with the struggles of the minorities for their security, safety, etc., and for their guarantees given by the Indian Constitution, or the atrocities against the Dalits and the Dalit oppression, or on any other issues on the horrendous attacks that are taking place on women today, on all these issues, anybody who is dissenting against this government or organizing protests are today being booked under draconian laws like the UAPA, the NSA, or the Sedition Act. The government has now appointed a commission bypassing the law, whereby the question is being discussed, was discussed, and now it is all kept secret. We don't know who they are in this group of people who are discussing this and what is happening. The law commission is out of the picture. They are saying that the Sedition Act must be further strengthened and to include a large number of sections which are today not included in it. So you have a very, very strong authoritarian, totalitarian police state structure that is destroying democracy in our country. So secular democracy together, that if you see that together today, that this corporate communal alliance like our central committee had analyzed that emerged with this central BJP government, and particularly strengthened further after the last general elections, This corporate communal alliance is today mounting an assault on all the four foundational pillars that I was talking of earlier. But the major assault that is being mounted is on secular democracy, and in the process, with ferocious implementation aggressively of the neoliberal reforms, of attacks on the rights of the working class, on the peasantry, on destruction of the Indian agriculture, all these together, that is what it is, the corporate communal alliance. And this is happening in a global context where there is a rightward shift that is taking place in response to the prolonged crisis of global capitalism. That is a separate matter. But here in our country today, it is imperative now that to safeguard what we have achieved so far, because our objective was to transform this political independence of India at the time of independence into the economic independence of every person, which can only happen as we move towards socialism. Today, what we are seeing is the destruction of what we have already achieved. Instead of building on that, towards moving towards an exploitation-free society, through the various stages that will be required to pass through. But instead of that, what we are seeing is a regression that is happening in destroying what you already have. So safeguarding secularism, safeguarding democracy, and safeguarding secular democracy is today of paramount importance. And that is why the Communist Party of India Marxist today says that on the occasion of this centenary, we have to redouble our resolve in order to save India, because secularism is important not only for preserving this Indian constitution and the guarantees and the rights it gives Indian people. That is very important. It is not only important to preserve the security and the guarantee of equality to religious minorities, particularly to the Muslims. That is also very important. But most important, from day one that the Communist Party has been arguing, that communalism today disrupts the unity of the exploiters. It disrupts the unity of the basic classes, which are the bedrock of a revolutionary transformation in India. The working class, under its leadership, the poor peasantry, the agricultural labor, this is the bedrock on which this revolutionary progressive movement and struggles can move forward. And that is exactly what's been happening in recent years. You have this working class, the Kisan and the agricultural labor coming together in many of these struggles. It is that unity which is the strength on the basis of which we can move towards a progressive exploitation-free society. And it is precisely that unity that communalism disrupts. Like Emin Roy told us in the 1920s, like the CPI's manifesto to the Guwahati AIC secession in 1926, the same holds true today, that this virus of communalism, what the Communist Party of India in its manifesto to Guwahati called the cancer of communalism, eats into the vitals of our national movement, the people's movement. And that is the most important reason for the communists to strengthen the unity of the basic exploited classes, which is the bedrock of our revolutionary advance. It is necessary to weaken the communal forces, if not defeat them. And that is the absolute essence of, crystallized essence of all the understanding of the Communist Party on this issue of secular democracy. That is why today it is absolutely necessary for us to lead the resistance against this attack, against secularism and democracy, to to seek the unity, while we independently lead the struggles against that as a communist party, to strengthen the left forces in this struggle, and on that basis to build in broader fronts in the defense of what India has already achieved, stop that from being destroyed, so that we can advance towards what our objective of converting this political freedom into the economic freedom of all our people. And that, I think, is the challenge today, that the CPIM is prepared and is facing already. Even the struggles, despite this entire situation of the pandemic, the national lockdown, and all the restrictions, our observations of this centenary, the way the Central Committee had planned it, unfortunately could not be held because of the situation of the pandemic and the lockdowns and the restrictions. But nevertheless, it has been observed all across the country. And now, through this sort of a medium, we are reaching out to as many people as possible with only one appeal, that we have to strengthen today the protection of our gains that we have made so far from being eroded and destroyed, and build on that to advance our progressive revolutionary movement. So that is the commitment, or in that sense, redoubling our resolve as a Communist Party over this 1 century of glorious struggles. And I think that is uh, a communist pledge that we should take when we clench our fists into a Lal Salam. That means the redoubling the resolve today to carry forward the struggle for a revolutionary advance. I think that is the essence of what I wanted to share with all of you. But I think I've saved about 2 minutes out of your half an hour, Salim. Mm. About 2, 3 minutes have been saved for you, so it'll be easier for you to manage. Put on your microphone.
Thank you, Comrade Sitaram. I think the 2 minutes you've saved is going to add to my kitty or other speakers
Yeah.
also. But very lucidly, you have explained the sacrifice made by the communists from the beginning, and since 1920s, how the communists brought in the class issues into the freedom struggle. That led to the land struggle, equality, irrespective of caste, creed, sex, and religion. The federalism, because India is a very diverse country with so many linguistic groups, ethnic groups, nationalities, sub-nationalities, and that continued in post-independent India for this linguistic state movement, successfully done. So unity of the people was paramount, and as you rightly pointed out, the unity of the exploited, because the exploiters are united, and that's pre-colonial, post-colonial era also is equally valid. Now the idea is battle for the battle for the idea of India, rightly pointed out, and there is secular democracy. So secularism and democracy, two ideas, but it is inherently connected in Indian context. India cannot remain secular if it is not a democratic state. India cannot be a democracy if it is not secular. So to protect and preserve secular democracy, that struggle is going on. And that's why for peace, for unity of the people, the communists are in the forefront for this 100 years. And now the coming days also you have to play this role. And this you have got from the golden tradition of a freedom struggle. And that comes to Nilotpal Basu now, our Politburo member, who will speak on the communists and the freedom struggle. And I think from there we can move on. So what was the condition in the pre-independent India in the colonial era? How in the 20s itself, the young people, the Gadarites first, and then those people who were involved in the Hijrat, they came into context. And besides the intelligence and middle class, the working class, the peasants, youths and students, they were brought in the freedom struggle, and that became a mass characteristic we acquired. Okay, Comrade Nilotpal Basu. Over to Comrade Nilotpal Basu.
Thank you, Comrade Salim. It's easier for me now that Comrade Sitaram has laid out the roadmap on the basis of our experience and how to move forward. Now, if we go into the actual contribution of the communists in the freedom struggle, I think it will be easier for us to understand in the background of what happened uh, during the freedom struggle in the 18th century, 19th century, and then proceeding towards that point where actually the Communist Party was formed. Comrade Sitaram has briefly referred to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and Salim actually has referred to the Gadarite movement that had taken place from in 1913-14. In fact, the trend was there earlier itself, and throughout the country, if we see that after the British entry and the ruthless exploitation of the East India Company throughout the country, it is the working people, it is the poor and the marginalized who were actually finding it unbearable. And that led to the first genuine national revolt of the Indian people, which we saw in 1857. It is true that the immediate trigger was the sense of insecurity which was being suffered by some of the feudal lords and kings and nawabs and so on and so forth. And the British also, British historians particularly, tried to portray this as a sepoy mutiny, just the revolt of the soldiers of the British Indian Army. But discerning observers understood that it was a uprising of all sections of the people, irrespective of religious affiliations. And it was Marx himself who brought this point out. And he said that whatever you may say, the truth is this is a national revolt in which Hindus and Muslims equally have participated. And therefore, you find the resonance in the Gadar movement, where the naming of the movement itself was drawn from the 1857 legacy of Gadar, which we refer to in most of North India. But no less important than the uprising itself. See, from about 2 months, the British took to recapture Delhi, but it have taken almost 2 years to really have the control back for most of North India, which was in rebellion. Now, this again was an indicator of the widespread discontent among the people. But what was the lesson of 1857? What was the lesson of Gadar? The lesson was very clearly that British could ultimately overcome the resistance because a section of the feudal princes, they sided with the British. Faced with uncertainty, they could not remain with the spirit of resistance. And Lord Canning himself says that these section of these feudal lords and princes, they acted as breakwaters. Otherwise, the storm would have swept us aside and we would have to pack and go. Therefore, it was very clear that Indian freedom struggle, if it had to succeed, had to be anti-feudal in nature. Without fighting feudalism, you cannot achieve independence. The other thing, and the British, when they transferred power from the East India Company to the British Crown, brought out a notification in 1858 itself, where they gave this concession to the princely states that they can carry their business as usual. And the British also understood, as one of the British chroniclers have observed, that this was a struggle which brought together the cow worshipper and the cow eater, the pig hater and the pig eater. And this had to be prevented. So the communal divide that Comrade Sitaram was referring to time and again actually sprung from this particular point. Though from the beginning of the 19th century itself, this trend was there of writing, of bringing out Indian history as a clash between communities, between religious denominations, but actually the active pursuit of divide and rule started with the outcome of 1857 coming to the fore. Now, therefore, in understanding the role of the communist, we must also grasp the fact that the role of the Communist Party, which was to come up in 1920, actually was rooted, steeped in the tradition of this anti-colonial battle. And it is not a coincidence that after the October Revolution and before that, Lenin's colonial thesis, which located freedom movements, anti-colonial struggles as an ally of the global working class as a whole. And the appeal to the peoples of the colonies to fight and stand in solidarity with the working class, that had tremendous influence and inspiration all across the world. So the fact that Indian Communist Party of India was formed on the 17th of October in Tashkent was largely because of the effort of the immigrants who had contacted the Communist International, and they brought together 7 people were there. All that we know now, the minutes are available with us. But it is not just India. It is, you see, if you see China, if you see Vietnam, in the Chinese Communist Party, that everywhere, I mean, immigrants who had been to different parts of Europe, and they were more awakened with and enlightened by all that was happening and the kind of sweeping changes taking place in Europe. They came back and organized their respective communist parties. And therefore, Muzaffar Ahmad, in his book and subsequent book, actually chronicles all that and clearly makes this point that the party which was started by the immigrants was an extension of the party inside the country. And we are essentially a struggle, a movement for the emancipation of India from serfdom and for national liberation. And all that is now well documented. This is also made explicitly clear because after its formation in 1920, I do not go into the details so much, material is there, but the anxiety, the enthusiasm of the newly born Communist Party of India came into evidence with the 1921 Ahmedabad session of the Indian National Congress, which Comrade Sitaram was also briefly referring to. And you see just the imagery. Maulana Hasrat Mohani and Swami Kumaran, one Maulana and Swami, actually reading out, moving the resolution on behalf of the Communist Party for full independence. And that was the spirit with which Communist Party worked. And the manifesto that Comrade Sitaram was talking about, the first session in Ahmedabad, before the beginning of the session itself, Avani Mukherjee and M.N. Roy wrote a joint letter to all the delegates of the Ahmedabad session of the Indian National Congress, where they clearly stated that all the demands of the trade unions, all the demands of the peasantry should become part of the charter of demands that Indian National Congress should articulate. Because the entire approach is the quintessence of the entire approach of the communist participation on the freedom struggle was here, that The communists were infusing a new class dimension to the freedom struggle. Freedom struggle, yes, but within the freedom struggle, unless we can mobilize and harness the energies of the working people, of the poor, of the underprivileged, of the persecuted and socially discriminated, and so on and so forth, you see, the freedom struggle cannot invigorate itself with the kind of energy and unity that is needed for overthrowing British imperialism, the British Empire. And therefore, throughout this period, if we see that these struggles have progressed, and the imperialists also from day one understood the threat of the communists on two grounds. One is the magnetic influence of the October Revolution and then the Soviet Union and its activities. And the other is the relentless and the militant and uncompromising nature of the Communist Party. And therefore, from day one, repression started. See, first, Peshawar conspiracy case, then Kanpur conspiracy case, and they were trying to also, defame the communists by saying Kanpur Bolshevik conspiracy case, as if communists were alien. They were coming from Soviet Union to organize conspiracies. That this was a battle of ideas. That is what they were trying to deny from the very beginning. And then later on, in 28-29, the Meerut conspiracy case, where 31, all of them Communist Party activists and leaders, they were jailed. So only after they could come out in 1934, the organizational center of the Communist Party would be organized. But nevertheless, struggles went on during this entire period. And in the national movement also a change was taking place, because particularly after 1921, the Chauri Chaura incident, you see the militant mood of the people, because the colonial rule was becoming unbearable for the people, especially the peasantry. Therefore, Gandhi had started mobilizing the peasantry also in a big way, but through his satyagraha and all that. But once these compromises started beginning, the people became impatient, and especially in the mid-30s. If you see, after Chauri Chaura in 1922 Bardoloi session of the Indian National Congress, the session of the Congress particularly rebuked the peasants of Chauri Chaura for having refused to give taxes and rents to the local landlords. They said categorically that is not the policy of the Congress. And therefore, slowly the mood changed, and it came to the fore in 30s, where we see formation of new political parties like the Congress Socialist Party, the Peasants and Workers Party, with whom the Communist Party also started working. And especially because the relationship of the Communist Party with the Congress Socialist Party, we had that led to the formation of the All India Kisan Sabha and the All India Student Federation in 1936. Before that, the communists also became very active in AITUC, which was formed in 1920. Therefore, that led to surmounting of the initial reformist tendencies of the trade union movement and became extremely militant. So along with these peasant struggles, we had major actions, industrial actions in most of these industrial centers that we had in the country. Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, different parts of South India, and industry-wise also in the cotton and textile industry, in the jute industry, in the plantations, in the railways, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the communists really had a major transforming contribution in the freedom struggle. It was not a mere participation, but as Comrade Sitaram was time and again asserting, that we added a new dimension, that is to uphold the interest of the working class and to transform the freedom struggle in a direction where we do not achieve mere freedom from a colonial rule, but actually ensure the rights of our working people. And it is during these 30s, because of the setup of these new very broad-based organizations, and where communists were leading, but at the same time they had become very powerful unifying centers. And it is because of these mass organizations also, you see the point that we are discussing, the question of fighting communal and divisive actions. Anywhere in the country where communal clashes took place, communal riots took place. I mean, we know for sure, coming from Bengal and Calcutta, the great Calcutta killings, it was the communists, I mean, the tram workers led by the trade union leaders who physically resisted. And rioters from both the communities, not just one community, but both the communities. So wherever it happened, in Kerala, in other parts of the country, that communist parties' existence, one of the defining features of the communist party's existence was its fight against the communal forces. Similarly, the question of fighting the caste hierarchy and the caste discrimination and the inbuilt anti-Dalit inclinations of the ruling classes in India that we see today was preceded by a similar approach and similar encouragement from the British colonial rulers, who never sought to stop these caste atrocities. I mean, those who say that the British had a modernizing influence on India and the Indian society actually overlook the fact that while these aspects of social evils and divisiveness was taking place, they did not take a role. On the contrary, it is the freedom struggle, and in which the communists played a very, very prominent role that had been there. Then we come to the period where this war has started. Now, there has been a lot of effort to malign the Communist Party on that. But I think I will not waste much time on this question, only refer to the speech given by ex-president Shankardal Sharmaji on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the freedom. There he quoted, referring to Times of India report in 1942, which in its turn referred to the comments by the then British Home Secretary, who said that, talking about communists, that they are an uncompromising revolutionary anti-British force. So I think history knows what has happened during this period. And immediately after the war was over, the post-war upside, as we say, because it was again rooted in India, but at the same time, it was not unrelated to the global developments. Just as we are seeing now, the right-wing shift in India is not unconnected to what is happening globally in the post-war period. You see, we had the process of decolonization and big decolonizing and liberation struggles were reaching a crescendo. And there, in the peasant struggles throughout the country, we saw the great Tevaga struggle in Bengal. We saw similar agrarian struggles in different parts of Kerala. We saw the revolt of the Worli tribals in Maharashtra. We had the Surma Valley struggle in northeast. We had the struggle of the peasantry in Punjab and Pepsu, the Baksat struggle in Bihar, and so on and so forth. And topping all this was the armed struggle of Telangana, which is a completely new chapter where the Nizam rule was taken by the Kisan Sabha and the Communist Party because of the ruthless exploitation that the Nizam was carrying out in cahoots with the British rulers. So therefore, in each of these struggles, it is the fighting and uncompromising nature of the communists that was brought out. And you see, from the very beginning itself, if you see that communists were attracting different political formulations. And these formations were being drawn to the Communist Party, not essentially because of ideological reasons alone. We were referring to Gadar party and the Gadar movement. Now, most of these Gadri Babas, when they came back, they joined the Kisan Sabha. They have built the Kisan Sabha and Communist Party in many parts of the country, particularly in Punjab. We have this struggle of what we call the revolutionary nationalists. I mean, the people who fought with arms. In Bengal, many groups, starting with the Chittagong Youth Revolutionaries and then Jugantar, Anushīlan, and they all subsequently got attracted, and particularly in Andaman Cellular Jail. If you see the list there, a large number of revolutionaries from Bengal, Punjab, and the Communist Party got formed and organized within those groups. And outside also, if we see in different parts of North India, particularly, it was so clearly underlined in the organization to which Bhagat Singh belonged, the Hindustan Republican Army, which later on was rechristened as Republican Socialist Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. And therefore, they were clearly attracted towards Marxism-Leninism, and which was classically described in the episode when the British jailer came to take Bhagat Singh to the gallows. He was reading Lenin, and he just gestured to the jailer, saying that just wait for 5 minutes. A revolutionary is having a conversation with another revolutionary, showing him the book by Lenin. So, see, this resilience, this flexibility of the Communist Party also, that while remaining steadfast to their ideology and to this basic approach of highlighting and underlining the need for bringing in working class and other working sections and democratic sections in the movement, you have to be accommodative of other uncompromising anti-imperialist forces in this struggle. And that is why when Congress Socialist Party really broke off with the Communist Party in the late in the late 30s, we had many of the Congress Socialist Party leaders also coming in the Communist Party. So I think this overall, very, very brief sweep of the role of the Communist Party. Therefore, we see many people from the Communist Party who were martyred in course of the freedom struggle, and most of this belong to the ranks to a very poor and working class background in different parts. The Communist Party leaders, we say that Comrade A.K. Gopalan hoisted the national flag on the day of independence in Vellore jail. So we have this proud inheritance of being a part and parcel of the freedom struggle of the liberation movement, but at the same time bringing in this new dimension of creating the proper place for the Indian working class and the Indian working people and other democratic sections for transforming India, where the even the content of the Indian Constitution does not remain empty. I will end by saying that, you see, after 100 years, we are faced with a situation which was described in the morning today. I was seeing a cartoon in Times of India where the governor of Maharashtra was reading the Indian Constitution. So then when the term after democratic secular republic comes, he is commenting, yes, that is very good, and showing at the television channel republic. So that is the kind of, I think it encapsulates the challenge that we are faced with today. And we believe that the heritage that we have of all these struggles and sacrifices for a centenary will help us remain dedicated to the cause of the future of India, where we will have, in a real sense, equality, democracy, and unity of the people. With that, I think I will end.
Comrade Nilotpal Basu, I thank you for bringing the clarity and the period of freedom struggle and the role of the communists, how this Communist Party not only added the quantity by mobilizing the working class, peasantry, youths, and students in the freedom struggle, but also added to the quality. And you rightly pointed out, after the formation of 1920, immediately after that, in 21, Ahmedabad session, that Pune Swaraj resolution by Maulana and Swami, the resolution was moved. So, Azadi Kamil, or Pune Swaraj, or complete freedom. So the narratives shifted in the freedom struggle in 20s from dominion status to the complete freedom. And that is the contribution. Secondly, the youths, the militant section, the revolutionary, those who took arms for the freedom struggle, how the transformation took place from Hindustan Republican Army to Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, as well as see the in the primary stage before 1920, in this revolutionary struggle, the religious symbolism used to play some role. But you see, Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, Asfaqullah, all these people, they took the oath in the HSRA that no religious symbolism will be there. And most important is Hasrat Mohani's coinage of the slogan Inqilab Zindabad. This is the centenary year. 1920, the Communist Party was formed. 1921, this slogan was coined. And immediately that caught the imagination of the youth and the participants of the freedom struggle. For 10 years, from 21 to 29, the demand for Pune Swaraj, as well as this slogan, independent, Inqilab Zindabad, became a clarion call. And that's very important. And that rejuvenated the freedom struggle. You also pointed out about the communist role and how it was acknowledged. From the very beginning, it was a Tashkent case, then Moscow case, then Peshawar, Lahore, Meerut, all these conspiracy cases. And still it's being continued. Now Sitaram or Brinda is also they're taken into the account for Delhi conspiracy case. So this UAPS role is continuing. The sedition case is still continuing. And you rightly pointed out the peasants thing from Chauri Chaura. Whenever Indian peasants came on the streets, even the nationalist bourgeois leadership, they were also threatened. And now, after these three bills passed in the parliament, how the agriculturalists, the peasants in North India, throughout the country, is coming out. And that is threatening the basic base of this ruling class. And I think now is the turn for Comrade Prakash Karat. Comrade Prakash Karat will speak on the communists and the class struggle. So I invite Comrade Prakash Karat to speak on this topic. Over to Comrade Prakash.
Thank you, Comrade Salim. We have already heard two presentations by Comrade Sitaram and Comrade Nilotpal Basu on various aspects of the communist contribution in the freedom struggle and in post-independent India. I would like to talk about how the communists viewed Indian society before independence and in the post-independence period from a class standpoint, and how the concept of class struggle was applied in Indian conditions. It was the communists who made a class analysis of colonial India, starting with M.N. Roy. And in the period of the anti-imperialist struggle, the main contradiction, according to the communists, was between British imperialism and all the classes in Indian society except the feudals and the landlords who had become staunch supporters of the British Raj. So the struggle for independence encompassed all the classes in Indian society. And the direction of the class struggle was anti-imperialist and anti-feudal. The working class and the peasantry were brought into the fray thanks to the efforts of the early communists. It is not accidental that the first communist unit was formed in 1920, the year in which the All India Trade Union Congress was also founded, which became the premier class organization of the workers. And in the elaboration of what is Purna Swaraj, communists not only raised the slogan of complete independence for the first time in 1921, they went on to say that Purna Swaraj means not just political independence, but also the economic and social emancipation of the Indian masses, the Indian people. And Purna Swaraj requires the bringing in of the workers and peasants into the national movement, into the political fray. And the class organizations which emerged in the fight for freedom, the All India Trade Union Congress, and subsequently the All India Kisan Sabha in 1935. The communists worked in these class organizations along with others, of course, and gave a direction to the working class and peasant movement to become part of the anti-imperialist and anti-feudal struggles. And the working class, which was organized, the earliest center being Bombay, even before the communists had emerged as a political force in India. In 1908, the textile workers of Bombay came out in a strike against the imprisonment and punishing of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And Lenin at that time hailed this action of the Bombay working class and said, this shows that the Indian proletariat is now developed politically conscious mass action. Because as Lenin had said in the struggle during the Russian Revolution, the class struggle is essentially a political struggle. It is not. Class struggle is not just raising some economic demands of the workers. Trade unions will take up the day-to-day economic demands of the workers. But political consciousness amongst the working class, the development of a socialist consciousness among the working class, that is the job of the communists. So, from the outset, communists began work in the working class with this class standpoint, that the class struggle is against British imperialism and against feudalism. And workers and peasants have to be brought into the battle for freedom. Freedom from imperialism and freedom from the feudal order. Without that, there can be no emancipation of the working people and the working masses of India. So this struggle, class struggle, encompassed all classes. It was a general national united front against imperialism. And after India got independence in 1947, that stage of the general united front against imperialism was over. A new state power emerged in India, class character of which was a state led by the big bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie in alliance with the landlords. But the freedom struggle, the values of the freedom struggle, the aspirations of the people, that they will be freed from economic and social exploitation and oppression when Swaraj comes, that could not be fulfilled because political independence did not entail emancipation on the economic and social spheres. So the Communist Party decided that the class struggle now is against this new ruling class. The working class, unlike in China or Vietnam, where the national liberation struggle was led by the working class, they could, after independence or achieving freedom, go towards socialist society or system. In India, it was the bourgeoisie which got the leadership, which had the leadership of the national movement and acquired state power. They did not want to complete the tasks of the democratic revolution. It was mentioned earlier about landlordism, for instance. The abolition of landlordism, the distribution of land to the tiller through land reforms was something which was not possible because of the bourgeoisie's alliance with landlords. It could only undertake some limited measures from the top. And therefore, class struggle in post-independent India has been directed against the bourgeois landlord classes and the state, and taking up those issues and measures which could not be fulfilled at the time of independence or the independence struggle. So the anti-imperialist, anti-monopoly, and anti-landlord aspect of the class struggle, that is what emerged. I don't want to go into the history of the communist movement or party after independence in any detail. It took some time within the party to arrive at this understanding. What will be the direction of the class struggle? What is the political aim and slogans on which the class struggle will move? That, as you know, led finally to a division in the party and the emergence of the Communist Party of India Marxist in 1964. But the struggle for land, which was referred to earlier by Comrade Sitaram, struggle for land reform, struggle to against the policies of the new state which wanted capitalist development, the path of capitalist development. Fight against all those policies which would lead to exploitation of the working people. This was the direction of the class struggle in post-independent India. Of course, there are different phases and stages in that. We came to a new stage when the neoliberal phase of capitalism developed in India 3 decades ago, started in India 3 decades ago. I'm not going into the history. But the Communist Party, and here I'm talking about particularly the CPIM, in its programmatic understanding, said we have to rally all those classes, apart from the big bourgeoisie and landlords, and bring them together into a revolutionary alliance which can replace the bourgeois landlord state with the people's democratic state, which will then facilitate the path to socialism. Now, in this, obviously, the working class has to be in the leadership of such a revolutionary alliance or front. But this is alone not sufficient. In a country like India, there has to be a firm worker-peasant alliance. And it is through this worker-peasant alliance, which will be the bedrock of the People's Democratic Front, that we can proceed towards transformation of our society. In the course of the class struggle being developed in India, we saw that where the working class movement, where the peasant movement advanced, where the class struggle advanced, in 3 states, West Bengal, Kerala, and Tripura, the political expression of this advancement of the class struggle was the formation of the left-led government, starting with the first Kerala Communist Ministry in 1957, then the United Front governments in the late 60s, and then, of course, the left front governments which emerged in West Bengal first, and then Kerala, in Tripura, and alternatively the LDF governments in Kerala. Now, these are products of the class struggle. Because whether it is the working class movement, the organized movement of the workers, not just the trade union movement, but a working class movement which has a political direction that developed in these three states. It is the land struggles and the fight against landlordism and through land reforms, which were implemented also by these left-led governments, that this powerful class base was developed of the working class and the peasantry in these three states, which for us is the pointer to the future, how we should proceed. But then India, as everybody knows, is a very vast, diverse country. And the development of the communist movement and the development of the class struggle has also been uneven. So the fight which started, the class struggle started for the democratic completion of the democratic revolution, the agrarian revolution, and then going onwards towards a higher form democracy, which is people's democracy, and then socialism. This is the direction in which the communists have endeavored to work and to advance the class struggle. And it is also the intensification of the class struggle which has led to these big attacks which took place in West Bengal, Tripura, and Kerala. The very forces, the ruling classes of our country, are also sought to suppress and stop the advance of the basic classes. Therefore, we saw the most severe form of repression in Bengal, 71 to 77, in Tripura, 88 to 93, and then a recurrence of that now, after 3-4 decades. Because as the revolutionary democratic forces advance, there will also be the counterattacks. Kerala also, we have only LDF left-led government now, that is also facing attacks. But this is part of the class struggle. But this situation has changed. Two things have happened in the 5th decade of Indian independence. The earlier path of capitalist development, I don't want to go into detail, with state intervention, the dirigiste model, that has been given up. With neoliberal capitalism holding sway, the attacks on the working people has intensified. The exploitation has intensified. And another phase began after the BJP came to power in 2014, about which all this what we have talked about, attacks on democracy, secularism, all that has reached a qualitatively new level. The Hindutva authoritarian regime today has the Hindutva ideology and agenda, it has got communalism, all that is there. But also remember, here is a party and a government and the RSS which talks about Hindus, that we are going to establish a Hindu Raj for the benefit of the Hindus. But this is only a political, ideological stance. The reality is something else. Reality is the BJP RSS regime, the Hindutva regime, attacks the Hindus also in a big way. Who's being exploited the most? It's the Hindu workers. It's the Hindu peasants. Who are all these lakhs of migrant labor who are forced to leave and walk home? Bulk of them were Hindus. So the reality is that this Hindutva authoritarian regime is, in class terms, the most reactionary government and regime at the service of big capital in India and foreign finance capital. And they're unleashing a big attack. What have we seen in this last few weeks, in the last parliament session? 3 bills, farm-related bills, which constitute an attack on our peasantry and the intrusion of corporate agriculture and marketing way. Destroy producers. 3 labor one last year. Big attack on the working class, including the right to organize collective meetings, etc. The Hindu is halting the rights of all actions, and the majority of the population, they are going to bear the brunt of this attack. And that's where communists, Sitaram about M.N. Roy and the Guwahati resolution manifesto presented. That is, here is the golden opportunity for uniting the working class against this assault on their rights, on their livelihoods. Uniting the peasantry against these 3 farm-related acts. And this twin attack provides the grounds for building, strengthening worker-peasant unity. It is through the building such class union, class-based movement and struggles that we'll also be able to fight back the Hindutva forces. So, in the recent years, we have seen some advance made in building worker-peasant unity. The efforts of the Center of Indian Trade Unions, the effort of Kisan Sabha, the Agricultural Workers Union, joint actions, activities to taking up joint demands. We saw the very big rally on September 5th, 2018 by these 3 organizations. First time manifestation of the worker peasant unity. So, fighters, both the farm labor bills or the legislation, no more bills now, they are the laws now, acts. This is going to be an important juncture in which we can build class unity, worker peasant unity, and also take on the Modi regime. Even due to the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic and lockdown, etc., even then, the central trade unions have decided they will go on strike 26th of November. We've already seen a series of peasant actions and also support. Central trade unions call for also has denounced this anti-farmer legislation also. And the more we have to get the Kisan movement and Kisan organizations to stand in shoulder to shoulder with the trade unions in opposing the attacks on the labor. So this joint actions and activities have to grow. But the class struggle is not just based on the issues of workers or peasants, etc. I said it's a political struggle, Lenin said. It's also class struggle has other aspects also. Class struggle is political, it's economic.
Salim, can you hear?
Comrade Salim, I think we have lost Comrade Prakash.
Yeah, we lost him.
But I think they'll try to restore. But by the time they restore, we can just recap some points. And as soon as Comrade Prakash's connection is restored, he can conclude his speech.
Hello.
But what Comrade Prakash was emphasizing on the class struggle, and rightly pointed out, referring to Lenin, that class struggle is essentially a political struggle. And from the beginning, since the formation of the communist movement, the communists tried to emphasize on the class struggle. And even before the Communist Party came into being, the working population, the workers in Calcutta, Chennai, mainly in Mumbai, and other centers, they came on the streets, organized strikes. Nilotpal Basu also referred to that. The tram workers, port workers, seamen, the municipal workers, the textile workers, jute mill worker, and in many places, they not only came into on the streets, but also organized themselves as participants to the freedom struggle, because essentially the struggle was against imperialism, imperialist rule, at the same time the landlordism or feudal laws and princes, because the Britishers got the Indian princes, kings, and the small these kingdoms as their farm allies. What happened in the post-independent India, the independence struggle was essentially against imperialism and against feudalism, and people thought that total Purna Swaraj or total independence means that emancipation from economic and social exploitation. And that's what the communists at that time in the freedom struggle brought, that ideas that freedom means not only political freedoms, but Sitaram also emphasized on that, but economic freedom as well as social freedom, converting political independence into economic independence. Without that, that is not going to be completed. But in the post-independent India, the entire scenario changed, because the imperialism is gone, but the big bourgeoisie made the compromise with the feudal laws, and that's why abolition of landism, even though some measures were taken from the top, but the task for the communists to take it farther forward, the Kisan Sabha and the working class movement, all these land reforms. And this is why in those three states where the communists are strong, that abolition of landlordism or land reforms took place. Bengal, Karat, I think Prakash is there, and you can continue, Karat Prakash. Audio. Karat Prakash. I think again we missed it. That's it. We have this technology, but we have to depend on the network provided by some companies, and then again there is going to be a monopoly, and the big bourgeoisie, they always, that's their inherent thing, that they want to usurp everything. It's not only that the peasants and workers are exploited, but all sections of the society, barring a few, they are being exploited. Even the business, trade, commerce, the small business, and non-monopolist capital is also facing the brand. When a few are making huge booty, the others are losing grounds. So not only you are losing the context, but Prakash, here is again.
Comrade Prakash, you can start speaking.
No, audio is not. No. Comrade Sita, are you
Can't,
listening?
no, can't hear. Can't
It's
hear.
visual only.
Only
Our
visual is
tech
come. We
team,
can't
And
hear.
then sound is again
in the
gone.
back room can help us.
Ranjil, can you help?
Yeah, let me sort it out, Comrade. Maybe till then, Comrade Salim can continue.
Or I can give this proxy.
I don't know. No, I don't know how much has Prakash got left to
Yes, some points are still
say.
there. We got some time,
Huh?
but
Yeah,
now I think.
he's saying 2 minutes.
Oh,
Just to wrap it up,
uh-huh.
He's saying two like this, so that means maybe 2 minutes. I don't know.
2 minutes, 2 more minutes. He was emphasizing on this present Modi regime
Yeah.
and how the working class movement is together with the
Developing.
peasants coming together and as forging a class alliance,
The
and it will have an
rudiments of
impact.
the rudiments of a worker peasant alliance.
Yes.
It is the rudiments are now beginning.
And Kamasita, if I can point out, he was also talking about that Hindutva authoritarianism is essentially a political project, and the Hindus are also exploited.
It's true, but it is a political project, yes.
Yeah.
And that is to replace this secular democratic India by their concept of a Hindu Rashtra or a Hindutva Rashtra.
On this phone. And Prakash can continue. কেটে গেল আবার। অন্য
Start speaking, Prakash.
ধরে নাও।
audio is gone.
Audio is gone. Yeah.
No, I think I can get him over phone. Just a minute.
I think he has said most of what he wanted to say. Salim.
Yes. Yes, comment.
Yeah, since he's saying only 2 minutes, I think he said most of the things he
Just a
wanted to
minute,
say.
Prakash. Just a minute. We are putting thing. Or audio. Prakash, we are trying to get him over phone.
Acha,
His
okay.
audio. Just a minute. Audioটা থেকে দেওয়া যাবে?
That's your backup working, Bengal backup. Salim?
Yes. Always. Bengals stand firmly.
Bengal backup is always there.
Yes, comment.
Good.
Hello. Yes, you can.
Yes. What I was saying was that the class struggle also is an ideological struggle. And we have to recognize that this Hindutva communal ideology has also swayed sections of the workers. We have seen in all the big industrial centers how the BJP has won elections. So the fight cannot be only taking up the economic issues. The fight against the Hindutva ideology has to be conducted systematically amongst the workers, amongst the peasantry and all other sections of working people. And the communists who have the most equipped ideology for this. What we talked about our consistent secular stand and our understanding of the roots of communalism. So we have to carry out the ideological and political struggle against the Hindutva communalism. This is part of the class struggle, and which is one of the main tasks before communists in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Prakash. I think ultimately we could complete his presentation. I thank Comrade Sita, Comrade Prakash, and Comrade Nilotpal Basu for their presentation. And because of this pandemic and this lock, unlock, and physical distance, we are compelled to organize these discussions over this network. And this is successfully done. And we have another sessions also tomorrow, as well as throughout the country, we are observing these 100 years of the communist movement, to organizing several programs. In Calcutta also, tomorrow we'll have a discussion and we'll get Comrade Sitaram Yechury over this network from distance mode. This pandemic has created a situation. The people's suffering is there, but the kind of exploitation, the failure of the capitalist system throughout the world and in this country, and the failure of this regime is now exposed. People can see through, be it the migrant workers, be the small businessmen, be the hawkers, be the salaried people, be the unorganized workers, they're suffering. And this is the task of the Communist Party, to carry on what we are doing for 100 years, what our predecessors could see, that to avoid this, to abolish this exploitation, we have to strengthen our class struggle. We have to replace this regime which is based on exploitation, and human society, humanity as a whole have suffered a lot. They need a better deal, and that better deal has to be delivered through this class struggle and replacing this exploitative regime based on equality, equity, equal distribution, and equal rights. In India, particularly, we are faced with this fascistic attacks, all round attacks. It's not only workers and peasants, it should be the health sector, education sector, everywhere this attack is mounting. So as the peasants are coming out, the working class is working out. On 26th November, we are going to have a national level strikes. Similarly, all other sections are to be mobilized. And this is a task, and we hope that we'll continue with this. And once again, I thank you, not only the speakers, but all the audience and participants who just observe this, listen to this, and will try to continue to communicate with you through these means. Thank you very much.